Welcome back to Track Talk. This is game G of the first round of the 1830 tournament that we've been covering. Um, the players in this game are DWFIV, who we'll just call DW, Cornjob, mrouser, and SB. So we'll jump into the auction and see what these guys get up to. DW's up and actually just buys the Skookle, so that's a little bit unusual. Probably not advisable because you just give other players higher value privates for face potentially. Cornjob is going to go for the CNA, mrouser on the CNA as well, SB going on the DNH, and DW is undeterred, just buying the cheap privates. That gives away the DNH for almost face to SB, and will give a literally face value MNH to Cornjob. I think that's a no-brainer. If you're Cornjob, you got to take that. He does have the CNA as well, so it's going to make him a little bit hard for him to price enforce. So really good news for mrouser too, who should get a pretty cheap CNA. So DW giving everybody in the auction gifts. Cornjob is going to contest a little bit here, and we see a pretty darn cheap CNA for 190. This leaves both SB and DW with $15 of private revenue, which is always a little bit contentious. Some people don't have the same play conventions, and you can end up having two players just passing to spite one another because they both feel like the other player should be the one to fall in the B&O here. Just for the record, I typically play that the player later in priority in the auction is forced to take the B&O in this type of situation. But some players say that the B&O came to SB first, so he should be the one to fall on it. We'll see what these players elect to do. SB passes and DW takes it, so that's the way I would usually play it as well. B&O gets floated for 76, which is pretty low, so indicating DW is interested in actually running that company or parring it. I should say floating it in the first stock round. Cornjob is up first and has his pick of the litter. Will be taking the NYNH for 67. mrouser has enough cash to float without the help of the PRR share, so we will see him take the PRR, but he actually floats it pretty high. Okay, actually over floating the B&O actually, which I guess if you're going to run the PRR and you see the B&O is floating early, you probably do want to float it over the B&O. This is such a weird situation where the B&O floats this low and the PRR player has the cash to float this high. I don't see this very often, but I think probably it makes sense. If you're both going to be competing for Lancaster, you want to have that leg up and float above the B&O. It is a little painful to float high like this because you're less likely to buy in your private the same operating round as everybody else, but that token in Lancaster can be so important that may be worthwhile. All right, SB is up, last player to take a company here, and they will take the C&O. So it looks like we're going to be off to a 4-company float and be 1830 game, and PRR is going to be leading us off in operating round 1. Heading east, buys a train. B&O actually heading south and tokening, so if I'm the PRR player, I'm kind of put out by that, wondering if I could have floated later and still got the Lancaster track locked down. But maybe PRR player doesn't care that much. Just happy to have the breathing space at Lancaster. B&O put down the tokens, so expect at least 2 trains. Yep. And the NYNH is heading toward the NYC. Looks like they were content with a single train, and the C&O should have a pretty easy buy-in of their privates if they want. Does have to buy two trains to get it, but we'll see if they want to push. Laying towards Toledo, not Chicago. And looks like they do push in for their privates, so they get the DNH. First company to buy in the privates. We're off to a pretty fast start, which is not atypical when you have 4 companies float. The only player with cash really is SB. We'll see what he wants to do with it. He is going to immediately trash the C&O into Brown. And float the NYC. Okay. NYC has track laid by the NYNH and guaranteed access to New York. The C&O has, I guess, lackluster track, but if it's able to token on Toledo and then run its 3 trains, I guess it's decent revenue. Yeah, it's going to be a while. Would have to upgrade Toledo and lay this track to get all 3 runs. That seems unlikely. The way this game has been going, I think that pace of play is going to be too slow. but does have a pretty healthy market to recapitalize this company now. So we'll see. Definitely aggressive play, but this game has been moving pretty quick. Everybody else is content to just hang on their cash, and SB is now floated. Going to sell the NYC so that he can buy a different paying share, and he's going to look to the B&O. Probably going to have the highest revenue, so reasonable. Everybody else passes, and we are into operating round 2. NYC, the newly floated company, is first up. He immediately links up with New York, buys a 3, and is going to shuffle a train out of the C&O. Not sure where he's going with that. We'll monitor that. PRR gets Lancaster, is going to token Lancaster and pays it out. Buys a 3, so not going to be falling back. B&O, 2 trains, going to upgrade his home for a little more cash and runs for 120, buys a 3 as well. NYNH upgrading his home, so the NYC player is thankful for the donation to his treasury, not having to pay that $80. And he's going to run a 2 train for 70 and buy a 3. CNO, we've been kind of curious what the plan is for this company. He's laying Toledo and not going to token it. Has just 1 run for 50 and actually buys the train back out of the NYC. So it looks like he realized he wasn't going to run that 2 train this operating round anyway, and was just using that to shuffle some cash out of the CNO and into the NYC. Okay. We are into the second round of this operating round, and the PRR player is going to upgrade and lay Philadelphia after buying in the CNA. Good news for him to get that expensive buy-in. Has 2 runs and is going to pay out, actually withhold for 90. Okay, so still a pretty healthy treasury in this company. And the only reason I question that is, if you're going to sell this company down, you want it to be unattractive so somebody doesn't steal it from you. You also don't really want to withhold when you have 60%. If you're going to sell it down and then other people buy a share or 2, then it's a much easier decision to withhold. So, okay. But pretty comfortably capitalized with the PRR right now. Probably not looking at a bankruptcy, even if he were to float his other company aggressively. B&O gets into Philly, so unconcerned about getting into Lancaster. We'll see which of these companies wins the Philly battle and gets access into New York. Not going to token, runs a 3 for 100 and is buying in his kind of cheap privates. NYC upgrades his home, runs his 3, pays it out, and buys the first, not the first, but A4. NYNH is actually not going to cooperate with Albany, just has a single train, so doesn't need the double access into New York just yet. And this is pretty nice for the B&M. B&M could have been like totally blocked here and basically a dead letter, but this gives it life. Does Cornjob have priority here? He does not. So no guarantee that he gets the B&M. The B&O player could sell a share here and have enough to float. We'll see if Cornjob actually gets the NYNH B&M combo or not. Runs for 100. He's also buying his privates, no surprise. CNO upgrades Toledo, and as kind of predicted, the 2 trains have rusted before he gets more than 1 run. So it does have a decent run as a result of the nice Chicago tile, but I continue to be underwhelmed by the CNO starts that are deviating from the standard Chicago track. He's going to withhold to stay orange, presumably, and we are into stock round 3. So all the players except for SB have a fair amount of cash, all sitting around $350 to $400. SB, because he has the share lead in 2 companies, also because he had to withhold and just not have great revenue, is a little bit behind in liquidity for this stock round. DW's up and is going to trash the B&O, so doing the SB maneuver, and is going to float the CPR of all things. Oh, okay. He does control the suitcase, the Champlain and St. Lawrence private, but this B&O is vulnerable. If someone takes that, he loses that and cannot guarantee that this would be a secure suitcase. And really, floating the CPR this early as a suitcase is just a lot of your liquidity locked up with very little benefit. So I think any company other than the CPR would have been a better choice, but okay. Corn Job also trashing the NYNH, so everyone is eager to float new companies here. Does get the B&M and has enough money to float it, shouldn't be a problem. mrouser is also selling the PRR, so everybody's got the same idea here and floats the Erie. So all of the companies have floated here in stock round 3. This is a very fast start to the game. And all these players are going to be sitting on very low percent presidencies of their initial companies. We'll see if SB wants to try and steal any of these companies and run 3 companies. Would be a fair amount of train liability, but he's got permanent train money in the NYC. He's got 150 bucks in the CNO with a full market. He probably could survive a train rush. Uh, no, I think that'd be a mistake. With 3 new companies floating, just 2 4 trains left, I think that taking over another company here is probably going to be a bankruptcy. So he needs to just buy some shares that he is confident are going to pay, maybe look towards his own IPO, and hope to weather the storm here. SB is buying a B&O, actually, sorry, selling a B&O and buying his own C&O. Okay. DFW or DWF is going to buy a CPR. Corn Job is buying the CNO, cheap CNO shares. He's got enough money to float the B&M. He feels comfortable buying some market shares as a detour. Very reasonable. mrouser is buying his Erie. SB is passing, so not sure what he's going to do. Maybe just waiting to see what other people will do before he locks up his liquidity. CPR is continuing to float. Looks like there's some auto actions going on, so this might move kind of quickly here. Everybody's just buying their own shares. SB's continuing to sit on cash. The CPR has floated, Erie has floated, and the B&M is now floated. So everybody has bought all their shares except for SB, who is going to go around and trash companies, it looks like. And this is actually very important, right? The operating order of these newly floated companies is very key in determining who is going to get these 5 trains. So the CPR technically doesn't have track and doesn't have an obligation to buy a train. So if it operates first, it's a little bit unpredictable whether or not it'll buy a train. It'll be basically at the president's discretion. The B&M, in contrast, is going to be obligated to buy a train. Now, that doesn't mean it has to buy a train from the bank. It could shuffle trains, the NYNH 3 train. However, is it really going to buy the only train and cause that other company to fall back? Seems unlikely. So if the B&M operates first, the other players can probably expect to have 1 4 before the 5s, because the B&M is most likely going to buy a 4. And that means that if you're operating second in priority, you have a pretty decent shot of picking up 2 5 trains in your new company, which is pretty strong. So I don't know if SB is looking towards this. He's really not in the running for this regardless. His NYC is too low in priority to hope to operate second, and he doesn't have the money to pick up 2 5 trains anyways. He'll also be train locked if a single 5 train's bought. So I think he's probably just trashing shares for the sake of trashing shares rather than manipulating operating order. And this is where if I'm in this game, get very frustrated because this really impacts the outcome of the game, and just knocking people down a single spot of the market to hurt their net worth is really a secondary consideration. It's not, the key point of tension in this game, but then you have people just selling shares in kind of random order that make it hard to predict. So Corn Job is he kind of self-trashed in order to buy paying shares. We'll see if SB is going to just buy and sell his company. He probably will, because it looks like he's going to be just buying and selling everyone to hurt their net worth. So SB does buy that share and trashes it. So I think that he may have done this in order that nobody's actual relative position in operating order is changed. I'm going to go back and just confirm that. So everybody floated, and then SB bought and sold the CPR, then he bought and sold the Erie, and then he bought and sold the B&M. So the operating order is unchanged despite his trashing. So I guess the most fair outcome. It's like he never really did anything other than everybody's net worth lost $10 or $60. Um, okay. We'll see if any of these players are going to try and operate behind the B&M. If I was in this game, I'd be selling a share to try and make sure I operated after the B&M. DFW or DWF, I'm going to keep doing that, obviously, sells the CPR, so maybe he's a little bit worried about this or interested in operating behind the B&M and going to pick the CNO. It's also possible he just wanted to sell a share to open up liquidity and buy a paying share. That's also very valid. mrouser is going to sell a share as well. And he actually has money for 2 shares if he wants. Going to pick up the CNO. SB also going for the CNO. And mrouser goes for the NYNH. So he is tied for the share lead and is operating last here. So could potentially see them picking up a 6 train. If this buys a 4 and a 5, 2 5s, and then a 6. If the Erie buys a 6, mrouser's other company has a 4, so he's not going to bankrupt himself by doing that, but he's going to be putting someone in danger here. We got a lot of companies sitting on single 3 trains, so if B&M buys a 4 and a 5, that's Cornjob's company. He would have to split the 4 and the 5 between the NYNH and the B&M. Because this 3 train would rust. Okay, well, this is going to be very dangerous for a lot of players, so should be pretty chaotic. Everybody passes. We are into the operating round. B&M is first up. Will be forced to buy a train, cannot be suitcased, but has to decide if he wants to buy from the bank or from the NYNH. And does buy from the depot. Okay, so CPR can buy a 4 and a 5 here. And if the CPR does, his B&O has a 3 train, so would be at risk of rusting. Yeah, this is going to be hard to predict. We'll see. If we're looking at the net worth here, which we should be paying attention, it's super close. So none of these players can be confident or should be confident that they would win in a bankruptcy situation. It's really too close, and little details in terms of withholding versus paying, operating order are going to be very hard for these players to determine if they should push for a bankruptcy. So I think that people should be trying to be a little bit conservative. CPR is going to lay himself to track and is going to buy a train out of the B&O. Okay. That is interesting. So the B&O is falling back trainless. He has money for a 5 train in both companies, but he's going to lose a run here. That I don't like. All right. Erie also has the same decision now to buy the 4 and the 5 or shuffle trains. Actually, it doesn't have to do either since it doesn't have track. And he is a person that could shuffle trains without losing a run, so maybe more likely to do that than the other players would have been. But I would like to see them just buy the 4 and the 5. It's going to shuffle trains as well, okay? And we're going to see a stall. Okay. I did not see this coming. We'll see who comes out ahead here. It's got to be the players with the most trains. If the game stalls, SB has a 3 and a 4, double access into New York potentially. He's going to be a front runner. CNO has decent track, 3 train. The clear loser here is DW, right? Running 1 train and going to be falling back on both companies. So he's fallen behind for sure in the status quo. These 2 players, mrouser and Cornjob, are probably neck and neck with one another roughly. The Erie track is going to be much worse than the B&M track. So Cornjob's probably a little bit ahead of mrouser here. Yeah. Someone has to realize that they're going to be falling behind here and break this deadlock on the Poison 4. There's so much cash in the game right now. Pays out 190. it feels weird to say there's so much cash in the game and then simultaneously be talking about bankruptcy. Um, but it's somehow, in my mind, simultaneously true, even though it's kind of a contradiction. But upgrades into Lancaster, bad news for the CNO. Going to actually give the CPR track, so breaks his own suitcase. Um, okay. And buys the train again out of the CPR. So now both companies have runs. He's shuffling a three train so that neither company will run, and just falling back on both companies. This is very hard to explain. I don't think there's anything to call this other than an error. Um, this is a way to lose, definitely. NYNH links up with the B&M, no surprise there, and going to run its train for 100, pays it. PRR upgrades Lancaster, going to pay for 120. C&O getting the number 2 tile, kind of a little bit irrelevant at this stage in the game given the track upgrade here. Not going to be seeing anybody get into Reading Allentown and run both New York North and South this game, but probably just in the habit of laying the number 2 track, always reasonable. Withholds, so probably SB realizes that everybody is going to be in a world of hurt if these 6 trains come out and is just trying to prepare for that. Only a 40% presidency, everybody is leeching off his revenue, so makes sense to stay brown and just prepare for the train rush. Although, contradicting myself again, if you're worried about bankruptcy, you may want to just pay out and hope that someone else bankrupts and you win when they do, just by virtue of having a higher net worth at the opportune time. NYC heading over to Rochester, running 2 trains. So I do think SB is probably benefiting the most from this stall, just because he's going to have the higher revenue on his companies. B&M gets over to Rochester as well. B&M needs to think where he needs to token. His other company is the NYNH, so he probably doesn't want to kill the NYNH's run with a token in Albany, but a token in Rochester is reasonable. You can leave Albany open for both of your companies, and you simultaneously hurt the NYC and the Erie company with a token in Rochester. You got to make sure that they don't just immediately bypass it, but I could see that being pretty powerful. He's got plenty of money. He's not going to place a token for now. Runs for 90, pays it out. And I guess the other benefit of a Rochester token is that it would allow you to run into New York, whereas right now he's not able to reach it. CPR, this player's play has been baffling. Going to lay Ottawa and shuffles the train again. So neither of his companies are going to run for this entire set of operating rounds. That's we've already talked about that. We'll move on. Erie heading up to Rochester is not going to run. Does have a train. NYNH links up with the Erie track, so breaks that suitcase. Not that it was necessarily intended to be a suitcase. And does have the token Albany. I think that makes sense. As soon as you link up with the Erie company, you're worried about them snagging that Albany token, which would really hurt both of your companies. So the defensive play there, I think, also would have been reasonable to token Rochester with the NYNH. Same logic for the B&M. You got to make sure that they don't bypass it. But you have more track points than mrouser or SB, since they both just have one company to your 2. So it's conceivable that you'd be able to maintain that blockade for the rest of the game, or at least until it didn't matter anymore. Runs for 110, pays it out. PRR lays the Reading in Allentown and is going to run his 4 train for 150. Very good. B&O trainless, laying a random track down south, and tokens Philly actually takes the Lancaster token spot instead of his own token spot down south here. And again, we've talked about this. There's no guarantee that this upgrades into New York. Also, very likely that the C&O gets a token in Lancaster here and cuts your runs. So this is a lot of wasted money. And again, it's going to shuffle a train in the CPR. So the CPR is going to be falling back again. And then buys the poison 4. Okay. Um, I struggle to think of a way that this could have been handled worse. I try not to be overly harsh in these commentaries, but this was atrocious. Okay, so runs for 100 and withholds again. Should be pretty secure against a bankruptcy now. I think he has a pretty full treasury in the NYC and has a decent treasury here. Also has a 4 train. I think he's okay. Doesn't have to worry about bankruptcy at this point. I mean, it's still feasible if he's somehow missed all the trains, but doesn't seem likely. He's going to open up a train slot for the NYC first in operating order and not ledged, so not guaranteed to operate first, but highly likely that we'll be seeing a 5 train in the NYC. Going to be hard for the other players to trash it far enough down in priority. We're into stock round 4 after a very confusing operating round 3. And looking at the game state here, SB with 9 shares is second in net worth, first in priority. DW is in last place, which is not surprising since none of his companies ran. Corn Job is first in net worth and first in shares. Has a 4 train in the B&M and a 3 train, has a pretty healthy B&M treasury, and I think he is close to ledge. No, he's not. So this operating order is going to be very important because he really wants to get a 5 train and hopefully not rust his own 3. And then mrouser bringing us up last in priority has the Erie, not the greatest track, and the PRR with pretty good track. Decent money in both companies, so probably not at risk for bankruptcy either. DW with a single 3 train is actually he has a 4 train because he bought the Poison 4, but only $600 between 2 companies, no permanent trains, is on the chopping block. Has not managed this train rush very well. SB buys his C&O share. DW is going to buy a B&O share, and I think we've talked about this before, but in this kind of situation, you really want to buy the other player's shares that you can be confident are going to pay out because you're anticipating your company's falling back trainless or having to withhold. So further investing in your own company is counterproductive. Corn Job is going to buy a B&O as well. Is this just to trash it? I think I would be. I'm first in net worth. This player's last in net worth. Most likely go bankrupt. I'd be trying to lock up his liquidity and hurt his net worth to increase the likelihood that he bankrupts when I'm in first place. Going to hold it for now. NYC getting bought. That is an IPO share, so a little bit of arbitrage, $8 towards your net worth, and potentially hurting your opponent if you sell it for another share. SB going to buy the NYC as well. DW selling a PRR. That does change operating order. Lets his CPR operate high enough that maybe he can snag a 5 if nobody else trashes shares. And he's going to buy a B&O, his own B&O. I still think that's a mistake. Corn Job buying the NY&H. mrouser passing. SB buying a B&M. Is he going to trash shares? He has the C&O and the NYC. So NYC should be safe with a 5. And the C&O, no way it's getting a 5. So I don't know that he needs to trash here. May just want a share that's likely to pay with 2 trains. Corn Job buying a CPR, that's got to be a move to trash. He does, and I think that's because he wants to make sure his Erie, actually it's not his Erie, not sure, maybe just angry at DW for doing trashing. Corn Job does buy paying share in the NYC and trashes that as well. Okay, so I think this player is going to make a push for bankruptcy and is just hurting everyone's net worth to try and get the biggest lead he can for when someone bankrupts. We'll see if he continues to trash. He's going to buy an Erie and sell it. Yeah, so I think that's the strategy, just hurt everyone's net worth. He buys his own NY&H, and we're into the operating round. This is operating round 4. Should see some movement on the trains now with naked 5s. Bypass Rochester being laid by the NYC player. He's going to pay and buy the 5. No surprises. B&M upgrades his home. And if he withholds, does not have money for 2 5s, but is going to withhold anyway and shuffle a train out of the NY&H. So now he does have just enough money for the 2 5s. Great news for him. And he's going to buy both of them. This puts the other players under a lot of pressure, a lot of players with no permanent trains at all and not a whole lot of money. PRR kills the B&O token, saw that coming a mile away, and is going to withhold for just over 630. So we already see the 6 train come out. Looks like the CPR should be able to afford a 6, but this is going to be problematic for his other company who did not get to run its 3 train and is sitting on just a 4 with, I think, very little treasury. Yeah, just $16. So this is very dangerous. The other players need to decide here if they want to push for the 6, or sorry, push for the D or shuffle um, trains. And if you're anybody not named Corn Job, I think the answer is you got to shuffle because you're going to lose if DW bankrupts with Corn Job ahead of you. So Corn Job has 2 5 trains in the NYNH. That's pretty strong, and he will be able to shuffle one of them into the B&M if he wants, so he's not at risk for bankruptcy. The PRR has good trains as well and good routes, so I don't think mrouser should be in a rush to push for the D train here. Um, Both SB and DW are potentially at risk of bankruptcy, and you don't win, speaking for mrouser, if they do. So I think we should see a shuffle here. Laying more track gets the token in Rochester, securing 2 runs into the double O's, and is going to shuffle. Good. B&O gets a little breather here, upgrading his home, runs for 180. No guarantee that this Philadelphia track stays open for him. We'll see. C&O immediately tokens Lancaster, so this Philadelphia token is worthless. And runs for 160, is going to withhold. And we're into operating round 4.2, NYC, upgrading New York. Runs a 5 train for 150, is also withholding. A lot of withholding. People are afraid of the bankruptcy here. The only player that doesn't have to withhold is Corn Job, and that means the rich get richer. B&M gets the upgrade into New York. With a 4 train, can't run it, needs the 5 train, or needs to upgrade Providence so he can bypass this DIT. Is going to pay because why not? Buys the 5 train. The downside of that is that you lose a run on the 5 train. So if you're going to neck and neck race for a bankruptcy victory, buying that train against operating order can be problematic. He probably doesn't want to fall back on the B&M if that D train comes out, so reasonable. But also would have been nice if he was able to manipulate the operating order by selling a share in the B&M in the operating round or something, or causing the NYNH to float up. But it's the difference in operating order is so large between those 2 companies in terms of their stock values that it made it infeasible to get that train across any other way. NYNH upgrading Albany, runs for 180, pays it. PRR is up and will upgrade Lancaster, runs at 6 for 250, pretty good revenue. He's paying it out. B&O is able to still get it access into New York, runs for 200, pays it. CPR trainless because once again, DW has bought trains against operating order and shuffled trains. Really no reason to do this. The companies both have runs, they both need trains, so he's just falling back unnecessarily on the CPR when he desperately needs runs for cash. And is going to shuffle a train out of the B&O. So he's got a permanent train in the B&O and a non-permanent train in the CPR, but does that really matter? Not really, because they both need permanent trains eventually. Erie running for 130 with holds and is pretty darn close to that D train upgrade. SB upgrading Pittsburgh and is also withholding. So 2 players very close to D train money, and we see DW making basically no effort at all to prepare for the D train. So you got to wonder how long are these players' patience going to last? Eventually, you may just buy the D train and make DW figure it out. Into stock round 5. Looking at the game state, Corn Jobs opened up a fairly substantial lead here, has 13 shares. Next closest is SB with 12 shares, but the net worth lead there is over $400. and the other three players are pretty much neck and neck in terms of net worth. But in terms of game state and bankruptcy risk, DW is far and away in last place. mrouser buying the NYNH, SB buying the PRR, DW buying his own B&O. Okay, Corn Job is going to buy an NYNH. And I think if you're Corn Job, you want to make sure you're buying paying shares. You want to make sure you're not open to a dump. And you want to make sure you're not invested in stuff that DW is, because you're anticipating DW is going to go bankrupt. And when he goes bankrupt, anything he's invested in is going to get sold down. So you're praying he doesn't buy shares in your company, or if he does, it's in a company that's ledged, which only the NYNH is, and you basically don't want to get dragged down with the sinking ship. You also may want to consider just trashing your opponent's stock value. So this B&M, that's your own company, but the NYC is a potential target to be trashed because you're competing against them when DW goes bankrupt. The fact that the NYC is trainless with $800 is a pretty sure sign that SB is going to buy that D train. So if you're Corn Job, you got to make sure you're in an absolute unassailable position to win in a bankruptcy situation. If he trashes the NYC down, he does make it operate after the B&M. The B&M does have a 4 train, so that's another reason to trash it down. And then you also put it behind your NYNH, which I guess is not really that relevant. But yeah, Corn Job really should consider trashing the NYC at least once so the B&M gets to run its 4, but probably trash it as much as he possibly can. mrouser is going to do it for him, it looks like, and sells a share. He buys a PRR, permanent train, most likely to be paying out. Fair enough. DW is going to buy an Erie. This is a company with no permanent train, likely not to be running in operating round 5.1 because this train will rust. So this is going to fall back and reduce his net worth even further. Corn Job is passing, maybe just waiting for everybody to put their cash down so he can maximally hurt their net worth. Not sure. mrouser is going to buy PRR, and DW is buying his CPR, another company that's not going to run. Corn Job buys his NYNH. And is actually going to sell it, maybe thinking better of that. Buys a B&M. Now that it's running first, he can be pretty confident that both those trains run, so it will probably have better revenue. Does hurt to take a $18 hit in net worth right before bankruptcy, but he's so far ahead, I don't think it'll matter. DW is trashing his own CPR, hurting his net worth, and is he going to buy paying shares? He does buy an NYC. This is another company that's not going to be running. And now B&O, it will run at least. And the NYNH. Okay. So B&M, as expected, does get 2 runs and is going to run for 320. That in of itself would give Corn Job the win if the game was close, but the game's not close, so he should be just fine. NYC is laying track and now has to decide whether or not he actually wants to go for the D train upgrade. He should be pretty clear that he's not going to win if he buys this D train, right? There's no way that DW can afford a D train, and he may just shuffle trains. He's been playing kind of strange, so that's possible. But if you're SB, you have to expect that if you buy this D train, that DW will bankrupt, and Corn Job, who's $600 ahead of you, is going to win the game. So I guess that's a decision every player has to make for themselves, but buying this train basically ensures you lose. He buys the train, upgrades, and we see the NYNH looking to, I'm not sure, and also the track probably doesn't matter. Pays out. PRR, last operation for them, going to run for 250. B&O runs for 270, pays it out. Erie has to shuffle trains, hoping that nobody bankrupts here, and then CPR is up and bankrupts. So very predictable. DW bankrupts, really mismanaged their 2 companies. Corn Job takes this in a pretty convincing lead as a result of having both 5 trains and not having to withhold in preparation for the D train as a result. Well played to Corn Job, and he will be advancing into the second stage of the tournament. Thanks for watching. We will continue to cover the rest of the tournament. We are 4 games into the first 16 games, so making progress. I think that it will be several months before all the games finish, but we will cover them as they do.